Hey, hi there, Joe here, and I'm going to add one last little final image editing video before the end of the year to include in the newsletter. And this one's going to involve some basic edits in Lightroom. I'm going to use a custom color profile on this that I'll talk about briefly. And then I'm going to add a new sky. I'm going to add some clouds in there because, frankly, it needs it. Now, this scene is actually in Telluride, Colorado. This is off a place called Last Dollar Road, and it's going off to some ranch down here that I didn't get to go see. So let's start in Lightroom. We're going to do the basic adjustments here. We're going to go through creating and using a custom camera profile, which actually is very simple and very fast. And then we'll bring it in Photoshop to bring in some clouds that were shot nearby. So let's make it happen. All right, so as with most raw files, it did come in very flat and kind of contrasty. So that's the first things we need to fix. You can see exposure is really kind of in the middle. No danger of whites. There's nothing white in the scene, and there's no really deep blacks. So let's start right away by opening some of the shadows. The mountains here have gone a little bit too dark. Let's open that. Yes, it's a little too light, but keep in mind we're going to add some more edits to bring that back in line. So some texture, some clarity, and I'm going to add a little bit of vibrance. It's probably going to need a lot of saturation. This did come in pretty flat. Yeah, that looks much better. Now, I had mentioned, now that quickly, by the way, we've gone from there to there to there. All right, looks a lot better already. However, we need to make the scene more interesting. So before we do that, though, I wanted to talk about custom camera profiles. So I'm going to turn off my little rating system here, and I know I have in here somewhere a picture of the color checker. There we go. All right, so here's X-Rite's ColorChecker Passport. And while I was out in Durango and Telluride, I wanted to create profiles for my new cameras, in this case the Fujifilm X-T4. And this is the image of the Passport you get with the colors from the Adobe Color. Now, I can get the white balance picker and come in here and pick, one of these two grays, say, to do a white balance, and that does help things. You see, it's the actual white balance of the scene was much yellower there. But white balance only does a piece of the color fixing. What's happened is the Adobe Color transition, this profile here, is costing a lot of color. This is not the way the camera actually sees the scene. And if you create a custom camera profile, you'll be amazed at what happens. And how difficult is that to do? Well, it's really easy. Simply take a picture of the thing. This is the target you're interested in, the one on the bottom, the one on the top's for some fine tuning, but not important for creating the custom profile. This is the important part. And here's how you create a custom camera profile. You ready? Write this down. I'm only kidding. You just go to File, Export with Preset, Color Checker. And I'm going to call it Fuji X-T4, I'll call it Durango. And I click on Save. That's it. That's how complicated it is to create a custom camera profile. You can then apply that profile to all the images you shot at that place. In fact, a daylight profile technically can really be used in any daylight scene. So I'm going to bring my ratings back up. So in the upper left here, you see it says Processing Profile. It takes 30-45 seconds. But like any good cooking show, I already had one done for you. So before we do that, let's take a look at these profiles that Adobe is supplying. There's a landscape one, which is a little bit overly saturated. I could counter that by bringing the saturation down a bit. Portrait, which this certainly isn't, but look at how flat portrait goes. There's Vivid, which has a tendency to get pretty bad, although this one, in this case, it actually looks okay. But I created a custom profile while here using this target. Watch what happens to the sky when I apply the custom profile. Look at how the color, both the color and the tonal range changes in the scene compared to the Adobe Color that you're given as a standard. By going to the custom profile, it brings back those colors. And something that can really tell the story, let me actually come back to the color checker image. Let me go back to that. Where'd you go? Here it is. Yeah, see, now it's telling us the profile has been generated. You need to restart Lightroom. But since I already created it for you, not necessary. So here's the target with the Adobe Color. And I mentioned that the Adobe RAW conversions, for some reason, are sucking the life out of the blues. Also, down here, this kind of magenta, this kind of pinky magenta and this kind of eggplant color have really lost a lot of color. Now, we've done no color adjustments to this image. This is just the raw file, other than we did pick a white balance off of the gray patch. But watch what happens to the target as we apply the color. Watch those blues. You ready? Look at the difference in the colors. We were getting this out of Adobe, and the custom profile gives us this. Now, the custom profile is something we can trust, because the way it's made is the software actually analyzes the patches, and it knows what the values of these patches should be under daylight conditions. It then creates a set of fixes for that. And actually, if you stare closely, I'm going to zoom in. Even patches like the red and the greens are changing as well. Let's come back to Adobe Color. Notice the red, although it's a more subtle change, it gets some of its saturation back. So this is a big deal, and this one tool will save you so much time in your color editing. I can't recommend it enough. Yes, you can order one off my website if you want, and you will get a bit of a discount off of it. That's not why I was sharing that with you. It's a tool I truly believe in wherever you happen to get it from. All right, so as I look at this, I'm actually going to back off on the saturation a little for now. But again, with our profile, even the saturation backed off, look at the color of the sky. I do find that the Adobe colors do seem to make skies go a little bit too cyan, which really drives me nuts, and I have to fix it all the time unless I have a profile. All right, so there are more compositional things to worry about in here, but we're going to do that after we put in our new sky. But we can just kind of look and see what are the problems. Well, one, the road is too big. It's too physically large in the scene that it's taking away from the distant mountains. Yes, it's leading us off and it's kind of guiding us to here, which we're going to help along. But the fact also that the path of the road comes almost exactly into this lower left-hand corner, although it helps to lead us in some ways it also leads us out. So we want to fix that. And we'll do that with cropping and a little bit of light adjustments. So we've got the basics kind of where we want it. Let's send this with our sky into Photoshop to replace the sky. So let's take a look at the sky I want to use. Actually, the sky I'm going to use, I shot the year previously, I believe it was, and it's this one. Let's see, what's the date on here? Yes, this was shot the previous year in the same neighborhood. And again, with the Adobe Color, the sky has a slight kind of cyan cast to it, which drives me nuts. I do have a profile for this, though, and this was shot with Sony a7R III. Look at the color difference by applying the profile for that. It's just amazing. Now, I think actually, with the saturation boost, the sky's gone a little bit too dark up top. This was obviously used with a polarizer. So while I'm here, I'm going to come into Use Saturation Luminance. Might as well fix this first. Go to Luminance, and I'm going to bring the brightness up of the blues. In fact, actually, I'm going to do it with a graduated filter to even do it more. We may not use that part of the sky, but let's bring the exposure up a little bit. I'm going to bring some of the blue back. I think something like that, maybe even a little bit lighter. Let's bring the shadows up a bit. Yeah, I think something like that's going to be better. And by the way, doing this in Lightroom before you send it in Photoshop is a good idea. So here's our two frames. There's our mountain, and we have our sky selected as well. What we're going to do is go to Photo, Edit In, and we're not going to choose Photoshop, but open as layers in Photoshop. That way they'll both be in the same document when they're opened. Okay, so there's our sky, and we're waiting for the mountain scene to come in. Okay, and there's our mountain scene sitting on top. It's a smaller file. There's the difference between a 42 megapixel file and a 26 megapixel file. So we're going to hide the sky for a second. And the first thing I want to do is I want to select where the old sky is, which in this image is actually pretty easy. Let me do something. I didn't make some changes. Let's zoom in a little bit. First of all, with the Magic Wand tool, I'm going to reset it to its default tolerance, which is 32. And I'm going to turn on contiguous because I just want to get the ridge line. So I click in the middle there, And we can see that the sky has a tonal range greater than those 32 points. So we hold down the Shift key and notice the magic wand gets a plus on it. That means we can add to it. And then let's do the same thing down here. Now, as I did that, because there's blue shadows and some of the snow on top of the mountain, it actually picked that up as we zoom in. And here we are zoomed in way beyond the resolution of the file. So I'm going to get the lasso tool and hold down the minus key. And I'm just going to drag along here to deselect this little bits that got picked. It's okay if you lose a little bit of the mountain because we're actually going to fade our new sky in. So just to get rid of that stuff. I could also bring up the magic wand. Again, let's do that. Let's set the tolerance to something low like 10. And now instead of holding down the plus key, I'm going to hold down the alt key, which turns it to a minus. And that allows me, see that? It just kind of does it for you. And you can scroll around. Yeah, I lost a little bit of that peak there, a little bit of that peak. Yeah, you can see that blue is very close. And where else needs it? Oh, we want to get a little bit of that one. Actually, that did a pretty good job. As long as we're at it, let's scroll across the peaks. Again, hold down the alt, turn it to a minus. That will fine tune it. And yeah, that is doing a better job. And just come all the way along the ridge line here. I see I got a little bit of snow right here. Let's go back to the lasso with the alt key. And the rest of the ridge line actually looks pretty good. Okay, so before we do anything else, let's save that. We'll save our selection as sky. All right, so let's deselect that and let's go back to our sky. I'm going to hide the landscape for a second. I'm going to get the marquee tool, which is the M for this rectangle-y thing. I'm going to pick that much of the sky and just copy Command-C to put it on the clipboard. So now we can come back to our original scene. We can deselect this. Now remember, we saved our sky selection, so let's go to Select, Load Selection, and on Channel we want to choose Sky. Hit OK. So remember, our sky's on the clipboard, so we can just go to Edit, Paste Special. Oh, I don't want to paste in place. Oh, look, see what I just did? I had the wrong layer chosen. I got to go make sure I have the right layer chosen, which is over here, our landscape. One more time, Edit, Paste Special, Paste Into is what we want. And it puts the new sky there. Now the scale and everything is all wrong. That's okay, relax. We'll hit Command or Control T, which is Transform. And we're going to make it smaller. And also that part of the sky was up much higher, so let's bring this way up until we actually see kind of the mountains there. And the beauty of skies, by the way, when you have something that is beyond the screen of a selection like this, if you hit Command 0, it will show you where everything is. And from this, I can actually make it bigger. And the beauty of skies is that you can do that kind of stuff to them. So let's say we want to do, let's see, where do I want it? Something like that. Now there's something going on here that I just noticed. In fact, to make it easier to see, let's get rid of all of this transparent area that we no longer need. And the quickest way to do that, yes, I could bring up the crop tool, but here's a really fast and immediate way to do it. If you hold down Command or Control or right click on the icon from the layer, this thing right here, notice it automatically selects that thing. Then I can just come up to Image Crop, and it will get rid of everything that's not part of that. Okay? Alrighty, so back to our image. Let's look at the scene. Where's the sun coming from? It's casting shadows on these sides of the peaks, which means the sun's coming from over here on the right. Yet our sky, looks like it's kind of lighter over here. Hard to tell, actually, now that I look at it, but let's try it. Let's try flipping the sky. So with that layer selected, let's go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal, and see if that looks better. And yeah, it does. So I'm going to hit the V key, which is Move. Let's just see if we want to move things around anymore. I think I want to actually bring this up a little bit more. Yeah, something like that. Oh, I see we have a spot. We'll fix that later. Now, one thing. Remember, there were mountains down underneath here. And the sky is a little too in focus, I guess might be a word for it. Down near the horizon, it should be fading a little more right behind the mountain peaks. So we have a mask here. In fact, if we hold down the Alt key and click on the mask, you get to see there's the mask for our selection. What we can do is one of two things. We can hit a gradient. Let's do it that way. So I'm going to hit the G key, which is the shortcut for gradient. And if you don't have it selected, go to Basics. And what the basics show you is here's black to white gradient. Here's black to transparent, and not sure what that one is. Okay. Usually it should be the other way around. Anyway, you see I've got black in the foreground, white in the background. I want black to transparent. Although I guess on a mask, black to white would work just as well. So here we are. I've got our mask selected. It's got the little corners around it. I'm going to hold down the Shift key to keep it straight up and down. And I'm going to start clicking about here, and I'm going to drag up to just over the peaks. And look what it does. And in this case, that didn't work. Why? Because the sky underneath was actually too dark. We want the sky to be lighter than that. So how do we fix that? So we have to undo that. Let's come up to the history panel, which is this thing up here, and go back to our gradient, actually go before the gradient. What else can we do? Well, what we can do is we can actually lighten that up another way. We could use levels, we could paint with white. Let's paint with white. Let's create a new layer and put white in the foreground. And this is going to get messy, but stay with me here. Let's get a brush, which is the B key. I'm going to get a nice brush. My hardness is set for 0. And I can't wait until they fix this. There's a glitch in Photoshop that is not showing the brush with red in the middle. It's annoying, but hopefully they'll fix it soon. And I'm going to paint along here just at about, let's just start with 10%. So I hit 1 on my keyboard. I hit 1 on my keyboard, and the opacity changes to 10. So I'm going to paint with white along here. And it's okay that we get the mountains. Relax. I'll show you what we're going to do with that. I'm lightening this up. In fact, let's make it even bigger. Yeah, I think that's more what I was after. So the sky looks, I think, much better. All we need to do is take the mask we already have, hold down the Alt key, click on the icon of the mask, drag it to our new layer, and look there, it just adds that whiteness to the horizon, which is typically what you would see on a scene like that. So that's looking much more believable. So while we're here, is there anything else we want to get rid of? Is there anything in the scene that Photoshop could do a better job in than Lightroom can? There is a little bent sign here on the post, a no parking. You know what? It doesn't bother me. What's this here? A barrel of some sort? Let's look at it at 100%. Yeah. Oh, that's a little culvert. No. So here's what we can do, though. We can do some burning and dodging because Photoshop does give us a nice way of doing that. So let's create another new layer. I'm going to come up to Edit, Fill, and I'm going to fill it with 50% gray and hit OK. It turns the entire screen gray. Relax. We're going to change this, the blending mode, from normal to overlay. And again, what that does is anything that's 50% gray on an overlay layer is transparent. Anything darker will darken the image below. Anything lighter will lighten. So I want to help the viewer get to the mountain. So I'm going to get a brush. And first of all, I'm going to put black in the foreground. We're at 10%, which is fine. I'm going to start to darken over on the edges a little bit, just so that it keeps the viewer, meaning you, from leaving the image. Let's kind of draw some paths along here. I want the grass to be a little bit lighter. Here as well, even the road. Let's make the road a little darker, at least in the foreground. It's okay if it's lighter towards the background. Where else? I'm going to darken this grass here. And actually I'm going to darken up kind of the row of pine trees going up the slope on that spot. Maybe a little here too, and also in this part of the ridge. Conversely, let's hit white. Let's hit X, put white in the foreground. I'm going to get a nice big brush. And I'm going to create a path that actually goes up to this peak. Gonna lighten it up a little bit. Pick how much we want. I'm gonna lighten up the light spots. Let's do that. Yeah, that helps. All right, now does it look like we've really done anything? Does it look very subtle? Well, let's see what it looks like before and after. I'm gonna hide that. And look at the difference as to where you look. Your eye's no longer going to this bottom left spot, even though we're gonna end up cropping a lot of that. All right, one last thing I wanna do here while we're in Photoshop. I'm gonna create a stack. And what a stack is, it takes all the layers you have that are visible and creates basically a flattened version, but you get to keep all your layers, and you'll see why in a second. So to do that, this is the layer menu, the 3 lines. But what you need to do is hold down the Alt key when you choose Merge Visible. Nothing happens, nothing changes on the screen, but the effect is different. So let me show you. If I hit Merge Visible, it just flattens everything. I lose all those layers, but I need them. So I'm going to back up in the history and now choose the same thing. This time I'm holding down the Alt key, although nothing changes on the screen. And the difference is now, if you look over here, I have a flattened version of the image, but I have all my layers. Here's why. I'm going to sharpen this using one of Photoshop. There's lots of ways I could sharpen it. I could sharpen it back in Lightroom. I could use something like NYX Define, which does an amazing job of sharpening. But maybe I don't want to do it to the entire image. In fact, as long as we're here, I don't think I've shown you Define lately. Let's go to NYX and use, Define is noise. Let's go to Sharpener Pro. And this is no longer a raw image, so we'll use the output sharpener. And I'm going to let this software figure out what output sharpening would be most appropriate for looking at it on a screen. There are also sharpenings for... All right, so here we are in the software, and there's sharpening for the display, which we're looking at 100%. So again, your images, you really want to see it at 50%. You can also turn it down a little bit. And when you sharpen, unfortunately, notice it sharpens the sky also. The sky doesn't need to be sharpened. If anything, it needs to be softened. So that's why we did the stack. So that's fine for the foreground. Let's just hit OK. Let it do its sharpening. But we don't want it to sharpen the sky. So here's what we can do. Hold down the Alt key again. We're going to drag that mask up to the sharpened layer. Now it's only sharpening the sky, which is exactly what we don't want. So we click on the mask, and it's Command or Control I, and that reverses the mask. So now if we click on Alt and see our mask, now only the things that are in white are actually getting sharpened. So now the mountain's getting sharpened, but not the sky. So that's the beauty of the stacking thing. All right, so I think that's all I need right now. I want to do some final adjustments in Lightroom, but let's just go ahead and save this. All right, so here we are back in Lightroom. Here's our image, our edit after Photoshop. And again, this is what we took into Photoshop to put that new sky and to do a little bit of light painting. Now let's finish it off. I mentioned there's just too much foreground. So let's cut to the chase and do a crop on this. And I'm thinking something about here. I want to be careful this road line doesn't end up exactly in a corner if like this, because again, that has a tendency to draw you out of the image. Just coming up a little bit is enough to fix that. The sky maybe just a little off the top and maybe a little bit off the right. Yeah, I think that's our answer. So let's hit done on that. Now while we're here, actually as I look at this, I think I actually do want to come down a smidge just to there. That's better. So while we're here, let's do some fine tuning. I'm going to go ahead and add my vignette. So I'm going to bring it all the way down. I don't want it so round. I want it more along the edges, but then I'm going to feather it into the image a little more. I'm going to bring the midpoint in, which brings it in a little deeper, and then I'm going to back off to 15 or so. All right, so a little bit more burning and dodging or light shaping as we're here. If I want to add maybe a little bit more to the sky, let's see what happens if we add a little more oomph to the sky. So I've got a gradient here. I'm going to show the overlay so you can see what we're getting. That's good. And let's add a little bit of dehaze to that to add a little bit of depth to the sky. And as I do that, I'm going to increase the saturation and the exposure a little bit. And that's pretty good. Actually, I want to add a little bit to follow this slope up and down. So let's get a brush and let's make it a lot smaller. I'm going to turn on our overlay again so I can see what I'm doing. I don't want to add the mask at 100%, so I'm going to bring the flow down to 70 or so, just to bring that down a little bit so it kind of follows the ridge line. And yep, that did it. So light-wise, I think I want to add a little bit more light into the middle of the mountains here. So let's hit Auto Mask. We'll show the overlay, and let's paint in here. Let's go back to 100% with our flow. I'm going to paint in there. Just want to get the tips of the mountains. I think I want to, whoops, I think I want to lighten these up a bit. At least these highlights, the shadows doesn't matter as much. Just that grouping right there. And okay, let's hit O to toggle that off. Let's bring up the exposure. That's better. And we can add a little bit more clarity to define those sharp differences. That looks pretty darn good. I want to put a little more saturation across the whole entire middle of the image again to help the viewer get there. So I'm going to create an oval gradient across the entire middle here. Notice invert is not checked. So if I were to do this, if I were to brighten this up, watch what happens. It brightens up actually everything outside that. So I need to hit invert. So it's just in the middle. I'm going to bring that up a little bit. And again, I'm going to add a little clarity and maybe a little dehaze. Oh yeah, look how that little bit of pop gets added. Also, since we darkened with the vignette, I'm going to, one more time, do a path. Let's get a nice big brush. And I'm going to hit O so I see where I'm going. I'm going to start right at the middle of the road here. Oh, let me turn off Auto Mask. Let's do that again. Turn off Auto Mask, and I'm going to have a light path. Just kind of light up the road so that it takes us to the peak. Hit O to turn that off, and let's bring the exposure up a little bit there, just to help us get there. And I think that's it. Let's take a look at it full screen. Yep, that's a lovely scene. Love it. And again, think we started, and I'll show you full screen again. After our Lightroom edit, we started there. And we ended up, yes, these clouds weren't there, although they were in the area, actually the same week a year before. That's the beauty of going back to the same place. So whether you want to go through that much work on your images or not, that's your call, but it does turn out to be a beautiful scene. Hope you enjoyed that. That's it for 2020. I look forward to seeing you guys in 2021, and I hope we all have a much better year in 2021 than 2020 was. Happy holidays, everybody. Be well. I wish you peace. Bye-bye.